Well, it is 10:31 by my clock, so we will get started today. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Media Matters workshop. My name is Caitlin Birdsall. I am the Executive Director of the Marine Education and Research Society, and I will be the moderator for our webinar today. I am joined by my fantastic colleague, Jackie Hildering. Jackie is the Director of Education and Communications for MERS. She is one of our main humpback researchers, and like myself, she is also one of the co-founders of our organization. Before we get too far into our content today, I wanted to start off this morning by acknowledging that I am grateful and lucky to be coming to you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Liquidoc people, which is the Wiwaikai, Wiwaikum, and Kwaika First Nations in what is now known as Campbell River. MERS as an organization is based just north of here in Port McNeill, and a lot of what we will be talking about today and the imagery you will see today comes from the traditional and unceded territory of the Kwakwaka'wakw people. Now, as your moderator today, I did also want to give a little bit of a heads up about some of the tech. I'm sure a lot of us are already familiar with webinars, but you are all muted, unfortunately. But you are welcome to ask questions throughout today's webinar, and we're asked that you do that using the Q&A function that you'll find on the bottom of the screen. Feel free to type in questions at any time. It doesn't interrupt the webinar or the discussion happening, but we will be answering those questions at the end, and I will be monitoring those Q&As as they come in. Another thing I wanted to let you know is that we are recording today's webinar. This will become available to everyone who registered, and it will be sent out to you early next week. So please note that this is recorded. We will also be sending some additional resources along with the recording of this webinar. So as we get started into talking about Media Matters, I wanted to provide a little bit of a context for why we at MERS are doing this. First of all, for those of you unfamiliar with our organization, the Marine Education and Research Society is a nonprofit organization, as I mentioned, that's based on Northern Vancouver Island. We are now entering our 15th year of operations, and really we are dedicated to promoting the understanding and conservation of marine ecosystems through three key pillars. Those are environmental education, scientific research, and marine wildlife response. We are particularly focused on marine mammals. This is where we do a lot of our work. And a lot of our research really focuses on understanding what are the threats to these animals. We then take what we learn as scientists in the field and interpret that into the education and outreach we deliver. Particularly, that education is really focused on creating behavioral change in people to reduce the threats to these animals that we study. Now, we do a lot of education and outreach. Hopefully, some of you have seen our work, and we work a lot both in social media and traditional media through our own means to target audiences about messaging, to do with that behavioral change, to educate them about marine mammals and how we all can play a part in better protecting them on the coast of British Columbia. A good example of some of this work is our Sea Below Go Slow campaign, which has been ongoing for nearly a decade at this point. It's multifaceted, from signage to presentations to even an online whale safe boating course that's about to come out this spring. Really, the theme of that whole campaign is about how boaters can become better educated and behave differently on the water so as to reduce the threats that vessels pose to these animals through disturbance, acoustic disturbance, as well as things like collisions. Now, in order to get these messages out, we understand we need a bit of an army. We need help. And so today's webinar is really in talking to those of you that work in media, both traditional and social, to help us get correct information out about legal, safe, and ethical encounters with marine mammals. This work in sort of trying to create allyships within the media with all of you really builds on two previous projects we have worked on with the North Island Marine Mammal Stewardship Association and 4VI, which is formerly Tourism Vancouver Island. Previous to this, we did work with those two organizations to kind of talk about shaping the discourse around marine mammals. One way we did that is through work with the ecotourism sector and talking about advertising and how the type of advertising we put out into the world really shapes the public perceptions about what type of encounters are acceptable within ecotourism. And so, really working with them to use the type of imagery that really shows that legal, ethical, and responsible operation around marine mammals. Last year, we did a more consumer facing campaign with 4VI and NIMSA called For the Whales, really about what are the best practices around marine mammals and how consumers can demand those best practices are followed and also perpetuate them through their sharing on their own channels and through their own means as well. So today, really what we want to do and the aim of this webinar is to talk about the media's importance in helping us get the right information out there to the public and to those targeted audiences about what is legal, how can people and how should people be following the laws and regulations that are in place, what is safe, not only for the wildlife, but also for humans, and also shaping discourse about what is ethical and responsible. So that by that we mean information that doesn't perpetuate or contribute to sort of negative impacts or misinformation about these animals and what is and is not right around them. We also want to provide some context as well about how we can make sure that the content we're putting out into the world is educational and that we are disseminating correct information about these animals as well. And we all know that you have profound impact on the public's information understanding and the information they're receiving. And we hope that we can work together in getting out that correct messaging. Now, that being said, we do really want to emphasize that we understand it is super challenging. When we had many of you registering for today's webinar, we asked you, what are the factors you feel are contributing to the promotion through media of activities or languages or imagery that doesn't help with the conservation of marine mammals, that perhaps shows things that are illegal or unsafe or unethical? And the four main things that over 130 of you told us were kind of the big factors affecting this were things like the lack of knowledge about the laws, lack of access to subject matter expertise, the pressure to share or create content that gets lots of clicks or high readership that's attractive, and that the public has misunderstanding of what the issues actually are. And so in today's webinar we are particularly going to be talking about exactly these factors to help you create content, to create media that doesn't perpetuate sort of those imageries or those activities that may be illegal, unsafe, or irresponsible. So this is what our webinar looks like today, and hopefully gives you some information that helps you bolster your content for the conservation of marine mammals. So we'll be talking about why there are laws and what they are. We want to preface this saying that we know the laws are complicated, and the more we can all do to get correct information, the better the understanding of what those laws will be with the public and with voters as well. We're going to be talking about beyond the laws, the ethics and the best practices as well. We'll be having a discussion about some flags. Yes, we're talking about flags today. And the reason we're going to talk about flags is that understanding the various flags flying on different boats may help provide you as a content creator or as a media professional to have context about what's happening on the water so that you can better report out on it. We'll also talk about some of the pitfalls we've seen in the media and some of the positives we've seen in the media, and really talk about how we can increase the positives for marine mammals from the media. And of course, we will be having that Q&A at the end. So please feel free to put those questions into the Q&A. We'll be addressing those at the end. So without further ado, I am going to pass things over to Jackie.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Here we go, folks. The riveting information about the laws regarding marine mammals. So why are there laws about marine mammals? It's to protect species at risk. And I think many of us are aware that the southern residents, the orca, that are more often in the habitat in southern British Columbia are endangered. But actually, 9 of the 13 species that are common to coastal British Columbia are protected under Canada's Species at Risk Act. It is also to generally reduce disturbance to marine mammals, and that disturbance is everything from noise. We find it's incredibly useful to help the public understand how sound is magnified underwater, and that there's much greater comprehension about why there are distance limits, for example. But even just the proximity of vessels, be they motorized or unmotorized, is known to disrupt life processes, everything from communication to feeding, to mating, to socializing, to resting. Of course, it's about reducing the risk of collision and entanglement. And then habituation is a huge concern. If marine mammals get used to human activities, they lose their wariness, and they also lose the natural behavior that, of course, has worked for them for thousands and thousands of years to survive. Important to know as well, and I think it's suggested by the images you see on the left, is that the impacts from humans are cumulative. So the mammal-eating killer whales here on the upper left, that's not the first vessel that roared by their heads that day. It's impact upon impact upon impact, layering on top of one another. But also, in addition to these threats and impacts being cumulative, they're also synergistic. And using the endangered southern resident orca as an example, so there, human-created toxins, and this is the information that the recovery, the government documents land on as the key threats, that the contaminants that come from humans that are in their fat, if the animals don't have enough prey, that those are then liberated. They impact immunity, ability to reproduce, and then, of course, the proximity of vessels and noise layers on the stresses and the impacts from the contaminants and the lack of prey. So the laws are not about human safety, but reducing the chance of habituation, entanglement, collision. Of course, there are byproducts to that of creating a more safe environment for humans as well. In no way am I suggesting that in the photos that are shown here and the media coverage associated with them, that this was the fault of the people involved. Know that, for example, with kayaks, that kayaks have even been flipped because of feeding humpbacks. In the extreme, though, when it is that it is human behavior that has caused a problem, there are another set of laws, there's other legislation that could lead to boaters being charged. For example, unsafe operation under Transport Canada. And these are actually fines that can be issued immediately or within 30 days. With regards to the laws, and you'll see the red bar at the top here, Caitlin and I are emphasizing we did not make the laws. These are government, go through government processes, government determined. But there are two main laws as they relate to marine mammals. The first is national. So this is Canada-wide, the marine mammal regulations. And they are under the Fisheries Act. They were significantly amended in 2018, and they're again under review. And that what we suspect might be more familiar to many of you is the graphic that you see on the bottom right, that in addition to the marine mammal regulations, specifically for the southern resident killer whales, there are management measures. So these are additional, and they are under an interim order, which means that to date, what happens is that they're updated annually. So there could be changes based on science advice, input from stakeholders and First Nations, additional Indigenous knowledge. I'm going to talk about the management measures before I talk about the national regulations. So in order to attempt greater protection of the endangered southern resident killer whales, who are more often in southern British Columbia, there are these interim measures, and they will be announced very likely by the beginning of May. Last year, they were announced on May 7th. The intent is to reduce disturbance and to increase availability of prey. So it would make sense that you are going to have a zone where the area to stay away from orca, all orca, is 400 meters, that there are no-go zones, there's slowdown zones, and there's fishing closures. So that's the big picture of these management measures and the attempts to offer protection to the endangered southern residents. Now to home in on the national law, the marine mammal regulations, emphasizing very strongly these are federal. What they include are minimum avoidance distances. These apply to both motorized and unmotorized vessels. And there isn't one overarching distance. The distances are that under the national law, you're to stay anywhere in Canada 200 meters away from killer whales or orca. And we know, though, that in that zone in southern British Columbia, that is approximately from Cape Mudge around to Ucluelet, that is 400 meters. Under national law, for all other whales, dolphins, and porpoises other than orca, if they're resting or with calves, it's also 200 meters. If they're not resting or with calves, it's 100 meters. We will summarize this all in the information we will provide as well. Also under the marine mammal regulations, it's not just about minimum avoidance distances. With considerations around disturbance and habituation, it is also straight up illegal, it's defined as disturbance, to feed a marine mammal, to solicit swimming with it or interacting with it, to move it, to separate it, to trap it between a vessel and the shore or between multiple vessels, or to tag or mark it. And you may remember the very extreme case of what happened as a result of habituation. Yeah, this was back in 2017, but as a result, so it was before the amendments went in, as a result of hand feeding California sea lions, and Steveston, one attacked a child and pulled her into the water. Also under the marine mammal regulations, there is mandatory reporting of any accidental contact with the marine mammal. So this would be collision and entanglement. The incredibly important number is what you see here. And it would be ideal if almost any marine mammal story has this number included in it and how to report. It is the Fisheries and Oceans Marine Mammal Incident Reporting Hotline. It is also the number that is for fisheries violations, and if there's any incidents of concern regarding marine mammals, like dead marine mammals and what can be learned from them, stranded marine mammals, injured marine mammals. This is not about vilifying people who have had an accident. And this is where media coverage can help so much as well, because if there is that kind of culture of blaming people, then there is reticence on reporting. Knowing, and it is an example here that we had then on northeastern Vancouver Island, what you see on the right with Auger, is because this was reported, we were able to go and photograph the calf that had been hit by the boat. Clearly the person did not want this to happen. And also it can count for education, we can track survival, and it can be learned from generally. Also under the National Marine Mammal Regulations, there are laws relating to aircraft, and it is understood that drones are aircraft. So what I think is understandable, that from a Fisheries and Oceans Canada perspective, that you want aircraft to go high, and that you also don't want, so there's the specific distances here, you also don't want the targeting of marine mammals. But this is where two pieces of legislation come together, because DFO, under the marine mammal regulations, say go high, but Transport Canada says go low. So together, effectively what happens is there's no flying drones around marine mammals at all. And we find that this is a surprise to many in the media because of using drone footage is so appealing, but so often it's illegal. And there is the exception, though, if there is a research license that's been issued by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, or a filming license, and what's weighed out there is potential disturbance, then is there a gain by way of conservation? And there are also special considerations with Transport Canada, where sometimes drones are allowed to go higher. There have been charges on the coast, or throughout Canada actually, with regards to these amended marine mammal regulations. But it isn't a system of fines. It is a long legal process. And you may be very aware of the one related to drone use. The ultimate charges through the court system could be up to $100,000. And the highest charge so far is collectively for the activities of flying a drone very low over northern resident killer whales that were rubbing on the beach. But here's additional examples of charges specifically on the Pacific coast of Canada. So Whale Watch operator has been fined, and that was helped actually by ecotourism professionals who provided evidence. A recent fine as well that has made clear that these regulations also apply to unmotorized vessels is the paddle boarder who went close to mammal-eating killer whales that had just made a kill. Another BC whale watching guide find, diving in with the whales is a clear do not swim with, feeding seals, and then there was also even a frustrated fisherman who threw explosives in amongst sea lions. But these are, with the amendments having gone into effect in 2018, it's understandable that there's going to be great care taken into what kind of cases go through, because they are going to set the precedent for what might follow afterwards. But again, this is not through the marine mammal regulations where fines can be issued. So it has to be perceived that this isn't ultimately about many people going through the court system. It has to be that people want to do the right thing, which is very much our approach. That rather than worrying if it's 200 meters, 100 meters, 400 meters, that there's the understanding of why these laws exist in order to compel compliance. There can never be enough enforcement or resources that go into the legal system. Education is absolutely essential, and again, a motivator for this webinar. Generally, the best practices, the ethics that are reflected in doing what's right for marine mammals and reducing disturbance has to do with increasing the distance from them, decreasing the time, decreasing noise by shutting off engines, for example, better boat maintenance. And very simply as well, if an animal's behavior changes, you know that you're too close if you're the stimulus for that happening. And then also, it's about changing language, values, imagery, and that generally this can be captured under that it becomes more about how wild an experience is and not influenced by human behavior rather than how close. And the two logos that you see here on the right-hand side are the two overarching campaigns for best practices around marine mammals, Be Whale Wise, and then our Sea Blow Go Slow campaign. So the perception has to be, like in our reporting, our education of the public as well, we're not suggesting that if you call the 1-800 number, to report a violation of the marine mammal regulations or the management measures, this is going to lead to somebody immediately getting charged. That is not what happens, and it is usually, again, not necessary. It is only, most people are operating out of ignorance, not out of malicious intent. The legal system could be reserved for those who are operating with malicious intent. And the importance of calling the line is that there's so much more than this being about charging people. By giving insight into what kind of violations are happening, it makes clear that enforcement is needed, and in what cases, what kind of amendments might be needed for the regulations, the need for education, how to shape best practices and the potential for conservation. And so much of it can be, good can be achieved through education and helping the fisheries officers focus their resources and priorities. For example, if a vessel again and again and again is being reported, then it's known that that is something that needs greater attention than maybe somebody who made a mistake once, for example. The flags. Kate did a brilliant job of explaining why we're talking about flags. So one of them is directly related to the law, and that is the AV flag. So that purple flag is the authorized vessel flag, and it is flown by commercial whale watchers. It is relevant specifically to that 400-meter zone. And what it indicates, what it signals, is that that whale watch operator has applied to Transport Canada and has been recognized as having the expertise to know which orca are the endangered ones and which ones are not endangered. And thereby they have the exemption that they are allowed to go to the 200-meter distance to non-endangered orca in that zone. They are to not watch southern residents, so the pressure is taken off them, and there are further reporting requirements and conditions. Important to know is that every flag has a different number on it, and that it indicates which vessel it's associated with. The research flag is, for example, what we have. Again, every researcher has a different number for their marine mammal license, and you'll see it all over our photos of whales that we indicate what license number the photo was taken under. This is not like one condition, like you are a researcher, you have a yellow flag, you're all doing the same thing. No, there are specific conditions. Is drone use allowed? Which species are you studying? Yeah, is biopsying done? Are you collecting scat? All those sorts of things. So these are specific, again, to every researcher. They are issued by DFO if the case is made that the research being done should have gains to conservation. It may involve being closer than the minimum avoidance distances. And then the whale warning flag is used by boaters. It was born up here on northeastern Vancouver Island. It's used throughout British Columbia and in Washington State as well. And what this is doing is creating a proactive community of boaters who are trying to help by raising the flag to alert other boaters that there's whales in the area, that they should slow down, be more vigilant, potentially alter course. And then, of course, it has to be taken down when there aren't whales around, because otherwise it has no purpose. But we're finding with the whale warning flag that people are self-identifying as the good guys. And then, of course, if that's what you're going to be, if you're going to help, you have to model the right behavior and have the knowledge of the marine mammal regulations and management measures. Now to discuss the positives and pitfalls. So discussing a few examples of issues related to marine mammals and how the media reports out on this, both the concerns and the positive aspects. So I'm jumping right in with entanglement. So it is, in my experience, potentially the most difficult thing to educate people about, because there is so much, very understandably, that if a marine mammal, a whale, a sea lion gets rescued, this gets an awful lot of positive attention, which is wonderful. But for every animal that is rescued, how many are there that are never detected on our vast coastline? And also, did that animal survive? You're probably well aware, as members of the media, that there's a lot of romanticized information out in the world. The whale knew that I was trying to save it. It jumped thanking me. But our knowledge is that the animals that are passive during disentanglement are the floating dead. It is extraordinarily dangerous. So any sort of media coverage that perpetuates the idea that a member of the public, somebody untrained and without specialized equipment, could do a disentanglement, even one of Canada's leading experts in disentanglements, died after disentangling a North Atlantic right whale. So they had successfully disentangled the whale, endangered whale, turned around, high-fived his colleagues. The whale lifted their tail, hit him in the head, and he's dead. So it's extraordinarily dangerous. And also, what an untrained person is likely to do with disentanglement is unlikely to help the animals. And I will focus on that. So here's an example then of a very positive incident where experts came in to disentangle a sea lion. Horrifically, it's a piece of plastic strapping, likely from a bait box, that causes the entanglement. There's wonderful positive news coverage around that. And thankfully, also in this case, the cause was discussed and the importance of prevention. So the realities with regards to entanglement are professional training and equipment is needed. The biggest challenge on our coast is how vast our coastline is, and that finding an entangled whale or sea lion, any species back, is the greatest challenge. So important to realize is that most often dead marine mammals either end up somewhere in our vast coastline where they're not seen or they're decayed before they're seen, where the cause of death isn't known, but they also so often drop to the bottom of the ocean. With orca, often you can know, uh-oh, this individual is likely dead, because they organize themselves in families so that if an animal's missing from the family, they're likely dead. But that's not the case for other marine mammals. As an indication of how important prevention of entanglement is that in our studies, to try to make clear how many humpbacks are very likely getting entangled, is we look at evidence on the survivors. And shockingly, our preliminary results are that about 50% of them have scarring that shows that they have been entangled at least once. So how many are dead at the bottom of the ocean and undetected? And then there is extreme difficulty in trying to be this person or somebody like me who is saying, yeah, it's great, but yeah, it's not what people want to hear. And I'm going to give you an extreme example of this. So the kind of thing that goes viral, and I've chosen to use an example from California, is please watch this and think of what I've just shared with you with regards to the need for professional training, professional equipment, knowing who the whale is so that you know whether it survived or not. And here we go. Yeah, so don't do that. You can imagine how viral this went. The whale lifts its tail, whereby we should be able to ID it. We have never, in our collective efforts across the North Pacific, known of a resighting of this whale. So did you get it, Sam? It models extreme dangerous behavior. Nobody gets in the water during a disentanglement. But yeah, how viral did this go? These guys ended up on the Ellen Show, and they both got $10,000 each from Shutterfly and were profiled as being heroes. Did you get it, Sam? So focusing here then on how important it is that there is professional disentanglement, is were the line here at the back to be cut, for example, now it's more difficult to see that the whale is entangled, to recognize it's entangled. And it is also far more difficult to disentangle the whale. Whatever the whale is dragging behind it is, of course, making it easier to recognize that this whale is entangled, but also this is where a tracking tag is attached to, So there's people up and down the coast, guardian watchmen, fisheries officers, who are trained to put on a tracking tag, not on the whale, but whatever it's dragging behind it. So if the whale's no longer dragging anything behind it, you can't get a tracking tag on. And again, this is the biggest problem on our coast. You usually have time to save a whale. It is the long-term impacts of entanglement that usually kill whales, from infection, from not being able to feed properly, not being able to move properly. So a tracking tag is put on, and then during a professional disentanglement, nobody gets in the water, everyone's wearing helmets, and whatever the whale is dragging behind it, there's actually buoys attached to that to slow the whale down, because the whales, unless so far gone, are not passive during these operations. So it is essential that that line is there. So with regards to media positives, it's about education. In good news stories, yay to good news. But if there could also be a focus on what to do if an entanglement is witnessed, and the importance of knowing if these animals survive, and that they're ambassadors for the many that are never detected on our in the vast ocean. And then the incredible importance of safety. You may recall from last year, this poor whale who became an ambassador, and there was broad media coverage around this for entanglement, and also for how difficult it can be to detect entangled whales. The whale we nicknamed Catalyst was entangled so long and or with so much weight that its fluke was actually severed off. And there were only 3 known sightings of this whale, yeah, despite it clearly being easy to recognize that this animal is in distress. So what we message to the public is the importance of reporting. And this is now specifically about whales, and we have a resource that hopefully is of use as well, where this is summarized. And it really is focused on just the same as if a human was in trouble. You need to know where they are, who they are, what do they look like, and then ideally evidence of them being in trouble, and that you report that to the correct place. And then the huge emphasis on the human safety piece, to not to try to disentangle, and that so often this is not a matter of urgency unless the whale is anchored to the bottom. An additional focus then for the concerns and the positive is reporting on close encounters. So absolutely, surprises can happen. I'm a whale researcher. Even knowing humpbacks as individuals, I've had close calls, yeah, because of their unpredictability as they feed on our coast. The kind of examples of surprises are that sometimes humpbacks, when they're not feeding or resting, they interact with their environment. And the photo on the right might suggest, like, oh no, the bad boaters. No, this family did not want this to happen. This is a humpback who then was attracted to the vessel and stayed with it. And they had great difficulty to get away from the humpback that is then referenced as mugging. You could have seals or sea lions that actually end up, yeah, trying to get into a vessel because they're being chased by mammal-eating orca. And then there's also dolphins and porpoises who, as part of their behavior, will choose to interact with vessels. So surprises absolutely happen, but they can also be strategized. So if I wanted to have a close encounter with a whale, I could, because I have had the privilege of learning from them for many, many years. So I would be able to recognize, for example, what whales might be more likely under certain conditions to have an interaction like this. So surprises can also be strategized. And one of the big things that we find is difficult to counter is this idea that it's okay if the whales come to you. No, it's not. Knowing the rationale, the reasoning behind the laws to reduce disturbance and habituation, that sometimes you're caught, like the family here, and you simply have to wait out the interaction. But otherwise, yeah, the best practice is to not have close encounters. So concerns related to media coverage, you might be aware of the recent coverage around the hydrofoil of dolphins coming in and interacting in Howe Sound. In an ideal world, that would also address, yeah, the best practices around this and how one would consider whether this is legal or illegal behavior. The concerns are that this kind of coverage, if it doesn't include information about the laws, is going to create confusion about them. It's going to perpetuate more of the same in a world of social media veracity. It is actually also going to have repercussions for safety and well-being if the animals are habituated. And then with regards to ecotourism, and this is actually part of the North Island Marine Mammal Stewardship's Code of Conduct, is it misrepresents what makes the experience on our coast unique. And they have that as part of their code of conduct in having marketing and social media elements to that. For these specific cases, then, with regards to being too close, the media positives are to include best practices, the reporting number, the concerns, the laws, and with regards to dolphins or porpoises interacting with vessels, the best practice is if you can stop, slow down and stop to reduce the interaction. If you can't stop, to hold your course, and it is against the law to try to solicit the interaction by changing your course. With regards to these interactions referenced as mugging, the content for best practices is don't move your vessel, put your engine in neutral, keep your engine down for human safety and stability, try to be less engaging so that the whale is less interested. And then again, it's illegal to approach a whale to have this interaction, to touch the animal, and you must report if there isn't the interaction. Moving on to the next positives and pitfalls is with regards to collision. The concerns are that, again, it may be referenced when a dead whale is found that this doesn't happen very often. But again, so often whales just disappear to the bottom of the ocean. They can die with no evidence on the outside that there was a collision, with no blood involved at all, as was the case here with Hawkeye, where a necropsy revealed that once the whale was cut open, that it showed that the whale had died from blunt force trauma. And there can also be vilification, as I referenced, of people who legitimately had an accident, which then reduces the chance of people reporting, even though it is the law. But also the whales sometimes get vilified. Whale hits boat rather than boat hits whale. The media positives around collision is the education piece, the element of human safety, how severe the threat actually is of collision, encouraging the use of the whale warning flag, how boaters can help. And there's also an app, and we'll follow up about this, where you can report in real time to verified large vessel operators, not to whale watchers, that there's a whale in an area, so there's the potential of them diverting course, and that you must report if there's collision. A couple of more examples. Swimming with, illegal. But sometimes seals, sea lions, whales even, might legitimately, accidentally, yeah, or coincidentally go by a diver or a swimmer. But there is still a lot of misunderstanding around this. It is against the law to solicit interactions, and sharing coverage can lead again to perpetuation of the same, other people wanting this more promotion. And for example, here with Steller sea lions, which are underwater grizzly bears, getting habituated to divers, there's truly the risk of human safety being a concern. The media positives, and in this news story, actually so positively, a member of the Whale Protection Unit was interviewed. There was information about the reporting line, the concerns, and that it is illegal to swim with or otherwise interact with a marine mammal. And then drones. The concerns related to media coverage. Again, thank you so much for viewing this. because it's illegal. It's straight up illegal to use a drone around a marine mammal unless you have a research license or a filming license. It leads to confusion about the laws. It's sexy footage. I want to get it too. And here's an example. The footage that you see on the left has been posted by a content creator who's an international travel presenter and adventure seeker. And what she put into the world is this is how you can fly drones and boat close to whales and orca in British Columbia. So I'm sure this will be on the radar of the Whale Protection Unit to follow up with this individual. The positives are surprise, education. Please report violations. Yeah, and in an ideal world, that if drone footage is being used, that it's flagged, that it's from a researcher under which marine mammal license number, or that it is done with a filming permit. And there has been positive coverage of how the Whale Protection Unit and other fishery officers are swamped with illegal use of drones. I'm going to pass it back to Caitlin, who's going to summarize how you can help.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And thanks so much for all of you again for being here. We hope this provided some context on how the media can help and how we hope we can create this community of allies within social and traditional media to get this messaging out there. We know the laws are complicated. We do not make them. We even know that voters have a hard time with the laws. We did a recent survey of 4,000 voters, and the number one thing they said that is an impediment to following the laws is that they're complicated. And hopefully in the future they will be streamlined, or there'll be more education from the government to help people learn them. But until then, those of us in the media, those of us doing education, we can help improve the public's understanding. And so that's really what we're trying to get across today. So really, we want, in summary, to emphasize that the imagery and text that you use in your media platform really can improve the public's understanding of the laws and best practices, about what is safe, about what is ethical as well. And that the imagery and text that you use in your content really will help shape that attitude and actions and expectations, and impact the well-being and safety both of marine mammals and of people. And so we're asking your help in getting in getting good imagery out there and getting good content out there that includes a lot of what Jackie's been talking about today, about education and making sure that people are aware. A few media best practices I wanted to go over, and I know this is text heavy, and again, we will send a copy so that you have some of this text as well as the recording of the webinar. But best practices for media of any type is to report on the laws and best practices when you are reporting on marine mammals and encounters between marine mammals or sightings with marine mammals and people. So we also ask in best practices to use images taken outside of the minimum avoidance distances or otherwise taken legally, so from land, for example. We ask that you include specifics about how the imagery was captured. So, was it taken from land? Was it taken with a zoom lens? What was happening under the context that helped reduce impact or adhere to those laws and regulations when that image was taken? You'll see in all our photos today that we include the marine mammal license where appropriate. Please, in best practices, do not use language that okays close encounters. Jackie spoke to this really, really well. But the idea that we can put pictures of boats and whales right next to each other because the vessel was shut down, or even because the people didn't know, even if that is true, it still perpetuates this idea that that is an ideal encounter, that that's so cool, that I also want to have that. So reducing that type of imagery, whether it was an accident or not, really can help kind of reshape public perception about what a good encounter is. It's not about how close, it's about how wild. The next is for best practices with the media. We ask that you don't promote or sensationalize these questionable or illegal activities. Great examples from Jackie today around disentanglement or swimming with these animals. And of course, we really suggest on all types of media platforms where you can promote the importance and value of sightings being relayed to research. A great way to do that is through the Oceanwise Sightings Network. This is the largest collection collection of sightings on our coast from citizen scientists that help us understand the distribution and occurrence of these animals, and also feeds into that alert system Jackie mentioned, where large vessels like ferries and tugs and container ships get alerts about these animals so that they can take mitigating measures in the way they're operating, then therefore impacting greater conservation and protection of these animals. There's lots of other projects that also want these sightings, such as humpback whales. We would love to get ID photos, and we'll be sending out a summary of how people can support research with their sightings in our follow-up resources. So, as I've mentioned, we will be sending out resources. We will be sending you a copy of this webinar as well as some text of some of these best practices. If you want a quick place to find all these laws, regulations, best practices, check out seeablowgoslow.org or bewhalewise.org, where this is all sort of packaged together in a nice summary. Our resources will also include information about our whale safe boating course. If you want to learn more about how boaters can operate in these sort of best practices, that ways that are legal and safe and ethical. We'll also send a high level list of organizations that might be a resource for you as subject matter experts. Including also where to report sightings of different species, and our, as I mentioned, recording of our webinar and the associated webpage we're creating from this content as well. So that will all come to you guys next week once we take a breath from the end of March Madness, end of fiscal fun. So with that, we're happy to start taking some questions. So if you haven't already typed them into the Q&A, please feel free to do that. And Jackie, we've already got a couple here that I will pass on for us to answer. So the first one is going to make me laugh because I actually told Jackie to take out the slide and she was right. The question was the first question that came in. It is, can you talk to how Canadian agencies cooperate with US agencies on southern resident orca protection? My bad, we should have kept it in. Um, and are you concerned about how those efforts might be affected by current federal politics? So before Jackie gets going, I just want to state that we do not work for the government of Canada. So we do not have those government to government relationships. But I think Jackie can still speak to this question.
Yeah, so there's somebody in the know. So, but wait, there's more. So the distances, the minimum avoidance distances vary per species, per area, per behavior, but also whales, and this is specifically with regards to the southern residents, are also transboundary. So indeed, now in Washington state, it is 1,000 yards that all recreational boaters and whale watchers are to stay away from southern resident killer whales. There is a petition for that to also be the case in British Columbia. It adds layers of confusion, but again, the marine mammal regulations, the national laws are under review, and these sorts of things are definitely, I perceive, being considered uh, to make things easier, because when even a boater who cares enough to do a survey is having difficulty knowing the distances, it does need to become more holistic. So it is on the radar, of course, of the government. And indeed, there is yet another distance to consider when you cross the border.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, next question here. Also one we predicted might come in. It's Edme is asking, are the marine mammal regulations part of a course or exam for getting a boat license in BC?
Sorry, why am I laughing maniacally? So the, the marine mammal regulations, national regulations, changed in 2018. We have had multiple exchanges with Transport Canada. To date, the information is not incorporated into courses like the Pleasure Craft Operators Card and the Small Vessel Operators Proficiency Card. There are operators, or sorry, course instructors who add that information, especially if these are boaters who are in the ocean. But this is a huge impetus for us to make the free online whale safe boating course The course is like DFO and Transport Canada had a baby because they are siloed, where DFO is about marine mammal safety, and then it gets siloed further that it's per species. And then Transport Canada is about boater safety. So the course, supported by Transport Canada's Boater Safety Contribution Program, and with expertise being shared very generously for us to make this course, that will be it. And hopefully that will be a resource that makes it very easy for language and content to be pooled. Yeah, and we also ask, please, if the media could help create the desire for boaters to take this course.
Thanks, Jackie. The next one is a comment from Luciana, and she just states, we recently saw a situation with pinnipeds in Nanaimo where people would get close to them, affecting their usual behavior. And she's just commenting that it's sad to see. And I think I maybe will just add in here that we totally understand, Luciana, it is sad to see. And we ask that whether you are in the media or not, you can use your voice if you see this being perpetuated on social media or elsewhere to say, this is not legal, this is not okay. And so we know that one of the factors that really influence other people is peer pressure. And so when people are not getting positive impact from the behavior that they're doing, if you're seeing them on the water, calling them on the radio and saying, that's not okay, you got to back up. Or if you see it online saying, this is not okay, it stops perpetuating sort of the attractiveness of doing this. So we're really asking for help both with the media and with the public to share what they know, and in gentle ways to let people know when what they're doing is unsafe, illegal, or unethical.
And if I
Anything
may,
to
Kate,
add to
I'm
that?
gonna, yes, thanks, Kate, as I already barge in. So please also report it to the 1-800 number, and don't be frustrated. The system is overwhelmed right now. But if things aren't called in, there's no data supporting the need for more resources for enforcement, for education, and so forth. So please report it into the 1-800 number or via the email that is provided. Again, without the expectation that it leads to somebody being charged. Most often, education can solve it, but also it proves the case that more resources are needed. And I also want to provide the positive that we've been at this for a long time. There is an incredible positive shift when it comes to the social license for sharing encounters that are close, illegal, and whatnot, where members of the general public are gently educating others.
Okay, thank you. And Jackie, just a comment. Someone said that they're having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. So maybe
Oh
if you're
dear.
able to get a little bit close. I know it's very unusual. There you go. Okay, next question. Thank you guys for these excellent questions. We'll try and get through all of them before we wrap. Carol Patterson is asking, how can a traveler know if they are booking with a tour operator who practices responsible marine mammal viewing?
So we, in the resource that we last did together with Tourism Vancouver Island and the North Island Marine Mammal Stewardship Association, there are the criteria listed there. So thank you so much, Carol, for giving us the chance to emphasize that. And we will share that link in our follow-up resource as well.
Great. Awesome. Okay, I have a question from our friend Megan Hawken Bennett. She is saying, a concern I have is that while we have social media users with high influence, for example, whale watchers here in Canada, using best practices, when leaving the country and traveling and working in other areas of the world that don't have rules and regulations, they are posting content that could be contributing to bad practices worldwide. How do we assimilate best practices worldwide? Oh, I'm going to
Oh,
leave that to
Megan,
you to answer.
I hear you, Megan. Megan works for Straight Watch, the education force, so you can imagine the depth of her concern. Uh, Megan, to stop from going crazy, it's at home first. And it is because even on the other side of Canada, the social license is very, very different, even though there's the same laws nationally. So instead of the focus indeed on what the swim with and the swim with orca in Norway, the touching gray whales in Mexico, is the focus on the why of things being done in British Columbia as they are. And of course, with regards to media, that if those international stories are picked up on, if that kind of footage is used, everything that we've attempted to share now applies, to make clear that this is not to the gain. Like, how does the animal gain from having a swimmer with it, for example?
Awesome. Okay, I've got two more, I think time for two more questions here. But before I get to that, I did want to point out that Aaron Gless has pointed out that CBC did a piece on people getting too close to sea lions 2 days ago. So thank you so much, Aaron, for alerting us. I haven't seen that myself. Maybe Jackie has, but great to know that the media was covering that. Really fantastic. Exactly what we are hoping for. Luciana has another question. It's about AI content. So it says, in terms of AI content, even though there are some general tips to help people identify these videos and photos, do we have any kind of resources or tips to share?
Yeah, again, so insightful. And we had it as one of the confusing factors for media. We're living in a world where it's hard to even know what reality is, and that we live in a world of, alternative facts. It is going faster, I think, than most of us can keep up with. We're grateful that there was a recent news story that was done on something that was so odd, in showing with AI people cleaning barnacles of various marine mammals, completely not reality. So I don't have a good answer other than it gives another reason to ensure that we are speaking about truth and putting imagery into the world that shows reality and supports science and all those things. But I don't have a better answer than that right now. And of course, actually, a consideration as well that is not particularly heartening in the current climate is that it should be that all AI content is labeled as such. And we older folks know what reality looks like, even what a whale looks like, where, yeah, I have extreme concern for kids who are growing up in a world of AI, so they don't have the relative base even to know what is real.
All right, last question, and then we will wrap for the day. This is from Kiva Anderson, who sounds like she's a video news producer in California. And she's saying thank you, but she's also wondering if you can speak a little bit to people on non-motorized crafts like kayaks or paddleboards. What are some things we can look for when we launch to avoid accidental encounters? Do you have any tips or resources to pass on for that?
Yeah, specifically with humpbacks, our whole See a Blow Go Slow campaign helps with that, that there are indicators of a presence of feeding humpback whales being present. And as a member of the media in California, you're probably well aware of the kayakers that were right in with feeding humpbacks, and that one kayak was engulfed, can't be swallowed, but engulfed, where clearly there were birds feeding there, there were whales there. It was acknowledged that whales were there, and the quote was, "It seemed pretty safe." So looking for indicators of presence like birds, blows, knowing from locals where there are areas where it's more predictable that there's likely to be vessels, all those things really help. And our Whale Safe Boating course really goes into this as well. There's often as well information shared on local VHF channels that is often, certainly in our area, it's whale watchers working together with researchers and advocacy organizations to reduce the pressure on the animals and help educate boaters.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here today. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone so much for coming and spending an hour of your Friday morning at the end of March, for those of you that also live in fiscal madness. We hope that this was a useful webinar for you, and we hope the resources that we send will also be of use. But please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have further questions, if you're looking for more answers. Our information is on the bottom of the slide here, and you'll get that in our email as well. And I do want to mention as well, a big thanks to funding. A lot of the work we do about sort of educating the public and shaping public perceptions and discourse is funded by the Habitat Stewardship Program under the Government of Canada. So thank you all for being here, and we hope that we will hear from you very soon. Thank you so much.